Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation. This is your host, Salah El-Laythi. I am delighted to have with me today Diana Larsen. Diana was the very first guest on this podcast, and I'm glad to have her back. I think I did something right, so she's back. Diana, welcome. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Salah. Yes, and I'm happy to be back. We had a good time the last time.
It's been close to a year almost since that episode. There has been a lot of learning that happened during the time that we've been working remotely and being at home for the most part. And I was looking at the last episode, and the theme last time was around learning and accelerated learning, how organization can benefit from applying learning and focus more on learning. And one thing that you said last time that piqued my interest is this idea of learning workers, thinking of knowledge workers as learning workers. So I guess before I go down that path, I want to just check in. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing just fine. Yeah. I'm fortunate in that when all the COVID closures started happening, I was already living with my son and daughter-in-law and my grandchildren, or at least a couple of my grandchildren. And so I have not been as isolated as some people my age are. And so I haven't been quite as cut off. And the ironic thing was that I had moved out of my home office because we rented some offices for the Agile Fluency Project, and we were in them for a couple of years. But when the everybody go work from home happened, it was like we had spent those couple of years trying to figure out what we wanted to do differently with the room that had been my office, but we never did any of it. So it was all still waiting for me here. So all I had to do was just move back in.
Yeah.
and I reconfigured things a little bit. So all things considered, it's been pretty smooth for me in how COVID has rolled itself out. I mean, I'm feeling the same, I think, stresses and sort of societal issues that have been going on for sure. I'm feeling the impact of that. And I live in one of I don't know, you may not have heard this before, but Portland is considered one of the whitest cities in America. And so it's very easy to live in Portland and never move out of a comfort zone. And we were very deliberate about moving into a more multicultural neighborhood, which aren't all that easy to find. So we have that advantage as well. We've got some diversity around us, got 100-year-old house to take care of. And so that's all kept us busy, but it's also kept us really aware of what's been going on societally. And I'm sort of glad that for a little while, the politics are kind of maybe not over, but at least diminished the awareness. But yeah, I've been very fortunate. My privilege keeps rolling on, I guess.
Yeah. I think the level of awareness is one of the biggest takeaways during that time is, I think a lot of the things that we weren't aware of or didn't really think about is becoming very clear. And it's a lot to process and be with. But I'm glad that you're connected and healthy and things are good. So is there anything that you would highlight as part of this learning experience from that past year?
Well, absolutely. There's a lot, really. The whole idea of shifting more to, in times that are changing a lot, when there's a lot of things that are unexpected and surprising and changing, and, the world that we live in is become in some ways smaller and more interconnected, and, our touch points are much greater. I mean, even our local meetup groups, the ones that I've been attending or speaking at, one of the things I've noticed is it's no longer just the people who live in the location of that meetup group. there are always people who come from distance and, adding in those voices. So there's lots of change, lots of new ways of doing things. And for me, I relish that because I love those opportunities for learning. I think that when we can embrace those, it keeps us resilient. So not only gives us the sort of the joy of new things to learn, but it also makes working through change easier for us as we develop our resilience skills, as we develop the understanding that sort of whatever gets thrown at us, we can deal with it. We can learn our way through it, right? I may not know how to deal with this new thing right now, but I can learn my way through it. And that's been a thing I've been thinking about a lot over this last year, and actually speaking about it at some events about how do we engage that capacity for learning, and particularly those of us in the Agile community and in the software world where learning, we were already understanding that how much of our lives are emergent and unpredictable and uncertain, and already developing those emotional and psychic muscles for dealing with those things. And I have enjoyed that part of it, that part of how are we responding to these things. And I know in my neighborhood, in my city, just seeing, I know that there are a lot of people struggling, and I have huge compassion for the folks for whom all of the fallout from COVID and politics and one thing and another have made life so much more difficult. From a change point of view, it's also energizing to see the new solutions that people are coming up with in response. And there's always that tension. There's always that tension between.
Tension can be good. And I think that's one of the points that I want to highlight is that learning comes with discomfort.
Right.
And it takes time to be able to be in that discomfort, to learn and grow. And so you mentioned something about we're as people who have been practicing Agile and doing these things, one of the values in Agile is this idea of responding to change, over following a plan. I really like how you also tied the emotional part of it, because, that learning impact our emotional ability to respond, or sitting in that emotion can either help or not help the learning process. So what have you seen or experienced as far as this idea of discomfort in learning?
Well, one of the things that I know, I think that my son Willem and I have wrote a book called 5 Rules for Accelerated Learning. And there are a couple of them that I think are particularly relevant to our, they're all relevant, but a couple of them stand out more in terms of the question you just asked. And one of them is the flow of information. And there's one called Start Obvious, Stay Obvious, which is, really keep your attention on what it is you're trying to learn and not get distracted. And what comes along with that in our book is this little dial that says, if there's not enough kind of emotional valence to something, if we don't feel challenged, if we don't feel some surprise, then we become bored. And that gets in the way of our learning. But if too much is thrown at us at the same time, which I think is some of what was happening in the summer and fall last year, so much was being thrown at us, and it was hard to sort of put our heads above water, and that can be paralyzing, and that also gets in the way of the learning. And so what we try to do, if we're trying to create learning environments for ourselves or for the teams that we work with or in our organizations, is to find that sort of middle ground where we can be really in the flow state, where there's just enough of I'm not sure what's going to happen here, to keep it interesting without being bored or being paralyzed by it. And so finding that flow state right in the middle becomes really important, and knowing when to sort of step back and say, okay, I need to stop and take care of myself for a little while. I'm starting to get overwhelmed, or hey, I'm just hanging around the house. I'm not really doing much of anything because I'm feeling like, there's nothing going on out there for me or whatever it is. Either of those places gets in the way of us building our resilience and our ability to learn. So we have to take care of ourselves. We have to keep enough interest and enough out of the same old without it becoming too much, too paralyzing and too overwhelming. So that's one thing that I've really been thinking about a lot, is for myself and then for the people I work with, what is it that we need to do to kind of keep our interest in that arena of flow? And then the other part of focusing on the flow is a rule that we call focus on flow, which is about sort of calibrating how much learning we're doing at any given time, making sure that we are able to sort of integrate the learning, make it our own. Maybe if we're on a team, choosing an improvement action that we want to do. And there's in complex adaptive systems theory, there's a thing called the Baker's transform. They call it the Baker's transform because it has to do with the action of kneading, stretching and folding, and stretching and folding. And so the focus on flow is really about, when am I stretching, and when do if I keep stretching, I'm going to break. So now I need to fold in and integrate for a while, and then stretch again and fold and integrate and stretch and fold, and keep that cycle going is another piece of it. So those are the kinds of things I've been thinking about. It's like, when am I becoming overstretched?
Yeah.
Or when have I been not challenged and been just sitting in the fold for too long and not getting enough stretch? And so those are things that's the kind of stuff I think about.
Yeah. That's a great analogy about like the bakers.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about when you're stretched and there's a breaking point, like how do you notice that it's time to fold now, it's time to integrate because there's too much happening?
Well, for myself, I've kind of learned the signs. I've paid attention over the years. And so I have learned the signs of, when is that happening? And for me, I get overly distractible. I have a hard time focusing, some of those kinds of things. And by the way, I do want to say here, where I learned about the Baker's transform was from Glenda Oyang and the people at the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. A lot of my good ideas have got transmitted to me from them. And so I want to make sure to give them credit. But that, I know that in myself, and in teams, you can notice it when tensions, when you start seeing tensions rising and people are, not able to sort of be flexible enough to bounce back. I notice that when people become overstretched, they lose their flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And that's emotional flexibility and physical strength flexibility and every intellectual, every other kind. So I look for those kinds of things. And there's also, things that you can look for signs of boredom. There's not been enough challenge. There's not been enough. We've just been sort of sitting in this state. I mean, because of retrospectives, whenever I go into a team and they're like, well, we don't really need to do retrospectives anymore. And I'm like, well, maybe you don't. So why is it that you don't need to do retrospectives? Oh, there's nothing left for us to improve. It's like, you've been folding too long. You're not paying attention to the possibilities that are out there, right? And so then I start, then I begin to bring in well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And my son Willem actually just published a blog post on Industrial Logic's blog about something he called tripe, which is, what are some questions you can ask when teams get into that, oh, there's nothing new for us to change kind of status. Yeah. So I'm, looking around, seeing all the different things that I can see to help people sort of keep in the flow.
It sounds like this is the word of the day here, like the flow, being in flow, and how to, because if you're not being challenged, then you lose interest. And I like how you connected this idea of there's not much to learn to resiliency, because I think if people feel overwhelmed and easily distracted by things, and maybe they're working on too many things, it's hard to find find a place to be in the zone, in the flow. One of the episodes I had a guest, we were talking about like resilience, and the metaphor that came up was the ball bounce back. So if the ball is deflated, it doesn't bounce back as quickly.
Right.
So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
the feeling of
Yeah.
being like bored or demoralized or too much
Right.
going on, and you feel that
Right.
you can't really bounce back quickly.
If it's overinflated, it pops.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good completion to this metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, I know we had like a couple of topics here to explore. And speaking of the learning and retrospectives, we have this month marks the 20th year since publishing Agile Manifesto and Values and Principles. And I know from, many conversations with you that you speak a lot about the essence of learning when you talk about Agile. So what have we learned since then?
Oh my gosh.
Any
My gosh.
big lessons?
Yeah, so much. And, I feel like was it Bilbo Baggins who said, too much and none at all, or something like that. It is a quote. I think individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software production over documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Those are golden. They have stood the test of time. I mean, the only thing that's really changed there is that Agile has begun to move a bit outside of software. And so, maybe working software over documentation isn't always the measure, but it is still producing that deliverable, understanding our purpose and staying focused on the purpose of the work, and making that sure that that's happening before we spend a lot of time doing other kinds of things. And of course, it's always over, right? The values were cast as both and. It's just this one more, right? So that I don't see, I don't have a quarrel with that, and I love the preamble of we've learned some things about software by doing it and helping others do it, and we're continuing that process, and so certainly I am a big fan of learning from the things that we're doing and learning from our work, and then sharing that with other folks. The principles also, very many of them are still entirely valid. I don't have them quite as memorized as well as the four values, but the art of simplicity and the people working together across the business boundaries, and reflection and doing retrospectives, and I mean all of those principles are still very easily translatable to any kind of cross-functional, self-organizing, focused on a purpose team or group of teams or organization of teams. So I don't have the same quarrel with the manifesto. I think there have been a number of things that have come along since then that are supported by that. I do like what Joshua and those folks are doing with modern Agile. I like what we're doing with the Agile Fluency model. I like what Team Topologies has taken on and the way they are really blending in lean and IT and all of these very learning and improvement oriented ways of working. And the idea of working more collaborative and the idea of collaborative learning and improvement, and not just focused on the individual. Recognition that none of us are in this alone. We're all, So, looking back, I think it's kind of amusing to think back that in about 2006 or 7, I was already having people, it was like 5 or 6 years in, because I was on the board of the Agile Alliance. And for a while I was chair of the board, and people would come to me and they would say, don't you think Agile is dead? Don't you think it's time to move on to whatever the next thing is? And I was like, well, no, I think it's maybe not in its babyhood anymore. It's growing, it's maturing, and it has matured further since then. But my analogy always was with isn't no, and the question was always, isn't it just some kind of management fad that'll go away? And I said, well, those management fads, they don't ever really go away. The good parts stick. And the good parts got incorporated into Agile and into lean IT and into lean manufacturing and so on. And I'm old enough that I remember shopping in the 70s and 80s before anybody cared one whit about customer value or customer satisfaction. You got to go shop for the things that people wanted to sell you. And you, whether you liked them or not, didn't really, or whether you had ideas about how they might improve their product, didn't really have any part to the equation, except for a few folks. And then Japanese management came along and the idea of total quality management. And that whole idea of customer value and customer satisfaction has never gone away since then. And I can't predict what all parts of the Agile space are going to stick and carry on forward when people are no longer calling it Agile or talking about Agile as a community or whatever. But I do know that some of it will. And I think that the Agile Manifesto was an amazing foundation for that. It came along at the right time in the right place to be well positioned to influence the world in a way, some other ideas have not. And so I think it's worthwhile celebrating that. So I was really glad when Scott and the other folks decided. I couldn't really participate, although I've done a couple of talks as part of the Agile 20, but I was so happy that they took on that role of organizing it and bringing in an amazing thing that they brought together. Hundreds of people all around the world having sessions on reflecting on where they are with Agile. I think it's just remarkable what they created.
I haven't been involved, but I missed some of the missed the event, but there's
more.
There's more coming, right? Yeah, it's always there's always more to learn, and you make me think of this quote. We don't learn from experience; we learn from reflecting on the experience, which is part of the reflection on where we are today versus when it first started. It, like you said, it was a spark of new ideas and thoughts that shifted the conversation from, the things that we were focusing on that we shouldn't be focusing on. We should be focusing on the other things that we haven't been focusing on, like, the interactions and the working products and softwares and dialogue.
One other thing, I think sometimes it's easy for me to forget that there are a lot of people in the workforce now that were not around in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, certainly not working, And so for them, a lot of these things get taken for granted. And it's great that they are. So I'm curious then about, it's going to be their generation's turn to create something wonderful and bring it to us, and not being held back by some older ideas. So that's going to be really interesting what they decide to carry forward and what they don't. And the fact that, they never worked the 80-hour weeks and slept under their desks. And, whereas I know a lot of people who did that.
Right.
Back in the day.
I think building on that can take it even farther. You mentioned the work of Josh within Modern Agile and Agile Fluency, and so it expands the ideas. And that leads me to this question about what do you wish that could happen that didn't happen since then? Like, what's missing still?
So before I found the Agile space, I was already doing organizational work redesign. I would go in and I would work with people, sometimes manufacturing folks, but more often knowledge workers, office workers, where their work process was not working well for them. They weren't getting the outcomes that they needed. And so we would
Mm.
come in, and the group of people that I worked with, we would come in and we would bring them some principles of effective work, like you have to balance the social and the technical. And
Mm.
it's called socio-technical systems design. And then we would work with them, and we charter their teams. And a lot of the things that I've brought into Agile, I came from those experiences. And I was so blown away. And I think a lot of people were blown away by the things that Scrum offered in terms of the roles and the meetings and the artifacts, and the things that XP talked about, and the XP values about, do these practices, these engineering practices, and so on. The piece that I forgot in all of that, or I didn't hold on to as strongly as I wish I had, and that I wish I had communicated to other people, was people designing their own work. Because in every instance, all throughout the 80s and 90s, when I was doing that work, knowledge workers always created a work process that was organized around cross-functional, what they called then self-managing teamwork. It became clear that in order to do any kind of knowledge work, you needed to work collaboratively, you needed to have a strong team, and so on. And they designed that, and they felt like they owned it, and they loved it. And people would come up to me on the street years later saying, "Oh, that was the best job I ever had. I loved that job." Whether they were still in it or not, they would talk about that. And I feel like in some ways, Agile kind of missed the boat by deciding, and I think I did too, although I sort of figured it out and then quit doing that. But by bringing in these prepackaged solutions, let's do it this way, right? As opposed to a set of principles and guidelines about what really creates a really good work setting for your kind of work. And let's talk about that. What are your environmental influences? How are you interacting with your customers? How do you want that to be? Do you want that to be different than it is now? Do you want it to be better? How do you want the flow of information to go through your team? All those kinds of questions, quality of work life and the importance of quality of work life got lost when we said, "Oh, we're going to come teach you how to do Scrum," or "We're going to come teach you how to do extreme programming teams in the right way," or "We're going to come teach you how to do." Crystal was a little bit less because it was a little more about reflection, but it still had its own. So, almost all of the methods and frameworks, and now the scaling frameworks, they've got their own idea about how this should happen. And I think somewhere along the line, we lost the joy of helping a team invent their own and use the guidance of, well, if we value individuals' interactions more than processes and tools, what is the minimum set of processes and tools we need? And how can we value each other more? What is the minimum set of documentation that we're going to need for somebody else to use this product that we're creating? And let's make sure we're doing just enough of that, and then give our attention to creating this really great product for this really great service, right? Those kinds of things. I think we could have done that differently.
Yeah.
And I wish I had paid more attention to that. And I finally did. But, it was, and so I did that with my own clients, but it was kind of too late to get it folded into more broadly. So we talk about that. It is part of the Agile Fluency model that we don't come in and dictate. We come in and we investigate and explore and make sure that we're creating the team that people really need.
Yeah, I want to explore that a little bit. So it sounds like it's like what you mentioned earlier, like, learning happens in that space between boring and paralyzing, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then when it's overwhelming with all these processes and practices and all the things that we need to learn to get to start, it becomes paralyzing. People don't want to learn anymore, or it becomes they push back. And so that's one of the things. So you wrote this book, Liftoff, and that put things in perspective in terms of how to set up teams for success. Because a lot of time, okay, let's all these processes and tools, we have this, let's do this, and then, get together a group of people and off we go. But you introduce different ideas with Liftoff that, you need some sort of purpose and context. And how has that been, with the virtual world now? Like, how is the liftoffs or kickoffs happening in your experience?
Well, I haven't heard from a lot of people, but people were lifting off and chartering teams, remote teams, before COVID
Mhm.
already. And it's the same principles. You just you lose the ability to bring everybody together in one place at one time, which is a huge piece of team building. People get to know each other that in that personal kind of way. But on the other hand, in a remote kind of world, you can put together a team with many different perspectives, many different, because they can be anywhere. You can pull those teams together and have a lot of strengths from the diversity, because you're not just pulling from your own neighborhood, kind of, so to speak. So, but the liftoff is the same. I just did a training. I'm in the middle of it, actually. I'm kind of working in the process. Did a training with a very large organization, a big financial organization, with their division that provides all of their infrastructure and sort of cloud and all that sort of foundational stuff for the rest of the organization to do its work on. And I'm working with 30 agile coaches who in the end will have done a liftoff and chartering with something like 240 teams that are all remote right now. And so we've been working through what is the best way to do that. And with the tools that we have, the idea that one wise step is to limit the number of tools you're using. So you figure out what your video platform is, and then what are a couple of other things that you want to, do you want to use Miro or Mural for some of your activities? Do you want to use Menti? Do you want to use, there are so
There's
many
some
wonderful,
design. Yeah.
yeah, there's so many wonderful tools out there, but picking the critical few that will help you put it through. And so we did a training. They all got the book and they read the book. And then we did the training on using the ideas. And now they are coming to me in smaller groups, to say, here's what we've designed for our set of teams. And we're having a conversation about that everyone can listen to. And so we're doing a series of those. And then they will start actually then rolling out the liftoffs a little bit later in the year. So, I mean, it's happening. It's happening all over the place. You just approach it a little bit differently. People could come together for a couple of days and be in the same place at the same time and work all day. You can't expect that from people who are on video. So you have to cut it up a little bit differently, and you figure out what's the right way to cut it up. You don't leave any parts out, but you just sequence them in maybe a different way. And then, allow for people to catch back up each time when you come back in, and those kinds of things. So, I mean, there's been some amazing folks. One of the things I was learning from right away last April, and we may have talked about it, was learning all the things that people knew about how to do online meetings and how to do effective online training and all of that. And so those tools are now out there. Those techniques are out there, and they're getting better and bigger every day. And so picking the right ones and then just doing it, still, the purpose, alignment, context, and the subparts of purpose, alignment, and context are all still valid. They're all still things that we need to do. The outcomes may look a little different than they used to, but it still works.
I think it's just like the values of the agile values. It gives us some other things that we need to focus on that sometimes we ignore because we want to rush into starting and start to do things before we have some sort of purpose. What are we trying to achieve here? And then what's, we need some alignment. So, and what's the context? Which saves us a lot of time if we have that, at least, spend a little bit of time and discuss or talk about that will save us a lot of time down the road. So that's another good area to focus on, and let people, as you said, you can apply the value of individuals and interactions over process and tools when you design these types of meetings. You don't have to come up with like all these different tools that you want to have to run or facilitate these virtual sessions.
Right. Too many bells and whistles make things distracting, and it makes it harder to learn what people need to learn. And whether they're electronic bells and whistles or whether they're actual bells and whistles going on in your
Yeah.
environment, too much of that, too many trappings. I had a teacher one time that used to talk about editing your trappings. Too much stuff gets in the way. And it's another one of those things that can paralyze the learning, get in the way of the flow.
So I want to spend the rest of the time we have on shift to the agile fluency diagnostics, because I think that's another area or another framework that helps the learning process. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about like what's missing or still missing is that design of people want to take part of designing the way that they want to work.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be given all the answers.
Right.
And the book that comes up, the idea of like drive, autonomy and mastery and purpose are motivate people to learn. And so how has that been helpful in helping people decide on what they want in terms of creating their own journey, basically?
Right. Well, with one of the additional tools that we offer with the Agile Fluency model is the Agile Fluency Diagnostic, which is, you could use any assessment really, but it's the one that reflects what goes on in the model the most. So if you're using that as a talking point, then using the diagnostic makes sense. And the way we do it is we create it in such a way that it's like a more robust team retrospective. So the team comes in and takes the survey, and then we just reflect back to the team what they have said about themselves. And then they choose what it is out of those things that they see. Are there things they want to amplify? Are there things they want to learn about? Are there, what is it that they want to do that they think is the best next step for them? And then we also give them the opportunity to ask their organization to enable some things. Like, what is it that's getting in the way of you doing the kind of work as a team that you want to do? And what does that mean that you could ask for from the rest of the organization to help with that? And then when we have that conversation with a number of different times, so for each team, it's hugely valuable. And I've often gotten the question, well, what if the team just sits back and there's nothing we can do. But I have yet to run into a team that doesn't really get into it when they see that there's a real opportunity here and that their organization has supported this effort to gather this information for them and give them this time, this really good time, usually maybe a couple of hours to really think about these things and design their own improvement. They get excited. And so then we take the results of lots of different teams and we aggregate that together. And interestingly, then that gives us a picture of what's happening across the organization, across the system. And so we can take all of those asks from all those different teams and we can say, here are the things that we think are going to, where you will get the most benefit from the investment that you make. This is where you can make some immediate progress. Over here, here's the things that we see across your teams that are real strengths that you want to make sure that you're making the most of those strengths that these teams have. And here are the things that they're going to do on their own. And they may come and ask you for some help with it, but this is things that are within their control. They can handle these things. Where you could really help is over here in these requests. And then that helps the coaches and it helps the leaders know really what the targets are. And it's all bubbled up from what the teams have told us. But the teams have not had a collective voice before. And the diagnostic gives them that collective voice. And we just serve as a channel to sort of carry that message. We add, if we have a strong feeling about something, we might add a little bit of our own kind of, here's what we've seen elsewhere. And your folks may not be aware of it, but this could be possible too. But for the most part, it just stays around what do the teams want? What do they need? What are they identifying? And how can we help amplify their voice back into the organization? And then the leaders can have some confidence that whatever investments they're making, they're investing in the right thing. And so that has really worked marvelously in the organizations where I've been able to be a part of that process. Like I said, we have quite a number of folks now who are licensed to use all these materials. And I don't always hear all their stories about when they've used them or what they've been doing with them. But I can speak from my own experience.
Yeah, I'll make a disclaimer. I'm licensed to
Yeah.
to run the model. And what I like about the model, the Agile Fluency model, is the way that you and James designed it was around zones, different zones. So it provides some idea around like where do you want to go? Like, it's almost like you got to start to think with an end in mind. Where do you want to end up? One of the metaphors that is used when exploring or explaining this model is that, okay, are you planning to run the marathon or or just run the 5K or just be able to go up the steps, or what is the goal here? Like, so different zones might lead to different ways of designing it, designing the learning. And so that's very different than if you already come with the solution. This is the framework that you need to use, or these are the practices that you have to start with. That might be helpful, but it's not complete. It's not useful.
Right. Well, and I was talking to somebody this morning about, we always have to be careful when somebody offers us one size fits all. And I'm a person who has grown up throughout my life and being on the heavier side of where humans are. And I know for sure that one size does not fit all. It never has. But it works both ways. I mean, you don't want to be in something that's too tight and gives you no flexibility because it's a size that's too small for you. But also if it's a size that's too big for you, then then other things are happening that's not right. And so yes, using the model and the diagnostic and the other tools that we have is, one really good way of making sure that you're getting the right size, the right investment for the team. And you're getting you use the analogy of runners. Absolutely. It's important to know there are people who run 100K marathons, and they even train differently than the people who are running a 26K marathon, but they had to learn how to do the 26 before they could get to the 100 and all the way down. I mean, I had to be able to run up and down a flight of stairs before we could do that, so understanding that there are certain sort of foundational things that you have to learn and that help you get to that next level and that next level. But also, if all I want to do is be able to run around my block 3 times a day to get my sort of bare minimum of activity and steps in, and just to keep me healthy because I want to focus the rest of my life somewhere else, that's okay too. Right. I don't need to go off and do the training for running a 26K marathon
I recently read the book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. I highly recommend it. And he was talking about like the difference between systems and goals. And I think the Agile Fluency model offers both. Like, you have a goal to strive for, goals gives you direction in the place you want to go. A system offers you a way to get there. Like, how are you going to get there? So you could, figure out, okay, this is the goal. I want to be able to run a marathon, or this is where I want to end up. So now let's design the system to help you get there. And again, back to that dial. If it's too boring, it was too easy, people won't be interested. And if it's too hard, people are also going to push back and not really, it won't resonate. So what's next for the model?
Well, what we're trying to do now, I guess, is to build our community. And not only, more people go into our workshops and doing, becoming licensed facilitators, which is great. And I encourage people to do that if they want to really kind of move from being like an Agile coach to really an Agile consultant. That it's a good way to do that. That's how we focus our work. But also build just broader awareness across the whole software community of Agile Fluency and the way it works and so on. And so Michael Tardif and I have begun doing monthly town halls, which is open to anyone in the public. It's a kind of a meetup, and we offer it twice a month so that people can come for, kind of the 2 halves of the world time zone thing. So, and where I am in Portland, Oregon, we're doing it on Thursday evening, which also fits for people in Australia, New Zealand. It's the next day for them. And then also then Friday morning, so that we can serve the people in Europe and Africa and so on. So we can kind of hit as many possible time zones as we can. So we're doing that twice a month. And so people can just sign up. We ask for a registration, but it's free. And you find out about it through our newsletter or some other sources, and I just come together. And sometimes people talk about Agile fluency things. Sometimes they just talk about coaching in general. It's sort of whoever shows up sets the agenda for the conversation. Michael Tardif makes a wonderful MC. So he makes sure that we say lively and interesting. And so we're doing that. So just to kind of spread the word. And we always have workshops coming up. And James Shore, my partner in this whole Agile fluency thing, is producing at the moment the second edition of the Art of Agile Development book. And it will feature much more strongly than it did before the organization around the Agile fluency ideas. And he is doing public review of that. So if you go to his website at jamesshore.com and click on books and click on second edition, you can see the progress that is being made on that book. And there's a way that you can sign up to become a reviewer and get advance notice of things. So what we're really doing right now is building awareness of what we have to offer and how it's the same and different from other things in the Agile space, and mostly focusing on helping coaches, whether they're internal or external coaches, kind of level up. So we want to help Agile coaches really move into that place of being trusted advisors and Agile consultants. We want internal Agile coaches to become those really internal change agents that they want to be, and to give them the tools and techniques they want to do that. And as you know, there's a lot of that in our course.
Yeah.
And so we're spreading more of the word about that really is a significant part of what we teach when we teach our workshops, that we're want to help people, want to help our peers. I mean, basically, both Jim and I have been there, right? And we want to help our peers build their practices so that they can be the best possible group.
I like the community comes from different areas, and from organizational learning and design and Agile and other practices, technical as well. So it's very broad skills involved, and it's again back to that idea of learning. What's the best way to learn? And this model can offer a lot of ways to do that. So I know we're out of time here. Is there anything that you want to leave us with?
I guess, if the only thing would be, if you are unfamiliar with Agile fluency and we've piqued your curiosity at all, our website is easy to find. It's agilefluency.org. There is a short video right on the homepage that's pretty easy to watch. It's less than 10 minutes. And if you want to learn more, then you go to the About the Model page, and there's a link to a free downloadable ebook. And that's just freely available to anybody. And you can also sign up for our newsletter there. And we try to curate and aggregate a lot of ideas about coaching and consulting in organizations, and provide links to that every month in our newsletter. And we collect them from all of our facilitators like Salah here, who give us ideas about what we can include in that newsletter. So rather than having a whole lot of narrative there, we give a lot of links to other places to explore. So, visit our website, see if you can find something there that's interesting to you, sign up for our newsletter, download the ebook. And if you want to go further, get in touch.
I will put the link in the notes, and also share with the audience. And Diana, it's been a pleasure having you again on this podcast. Every time we talk, I learn something new, a lot actually. So thank you for coming back.
Yeah, I enjoy talking with you, and I enjoy the questions that you ask. You ask really good questions, so I appreciate that about this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity. Then repeat.